following video is brought to you by the Boston Sports Entertainment Network. Please consider liking and subscribing for more Boston sports content.
I got the Boston Celtics going to the final. I got them winning without.
It's time to represent your city. Put your hands up. Cali, you know we do it for Boston. Hey, ain't nobody gonna like Boston. Yeah, hey, ain't nobody do it like Boston. Where the legends get made, where the banners get raised, bright lights, big stage. Boston. All the fire we bring in a city full of rings, it's a beautiful thing out in Boston. And you ain't hard like that. You don't put it on the line with your squad like that. That's right, Boston. All we do is win like cigars in the gym, and we at it again. I say, Beantown, what's up? What's up? 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 Feel the energy shift, now we jumping at the gym. Represent, showing out how we ball above the rim. Larry Legend, 86, to the truth in 08. Cement your name with the all-time greats. Still banner 18 in the Raptors. Celtic green, only green that matters. It's about that time. Ain't another city that's louder than mine. Always gonna shine with the game on the line. What you think was gonna happen, man? That's how we do it in Boston. Ain't nobody gonna like Boston. Yeah, yeah. Ain't nobody do it like Boston.
All right. Welcome into this episode of the Dynasty Proud podcast, brought to you by BSEN. My name is Ryan. I'm at 19_loading on Twitter. Back here with me is Alex at AlexZachary305. And we got a guest with us this week. It's Cameron Tabatabaie, who I discussed his pronunciation of that last name with him beforehand, so I didn't screw that up. And if you're on Celtics Twitter, you probably know him and know his work. But in case you don't, he's a senior contributor for the Celtics Wire and host of the Celtics Lab podcast. So, guys, how you doing?
Yeah, man, I'm great. Between the intro and seeing Alex's dog, I'm pumped up and I'm happy because, so
we're recovering well here. So Tatum's doing well, getting ready for the playoffs.
Yeah, what's up, Tatum?
All right, cool. So, first of all, Cameron, good to have you on. Obviously, there's plenty to talk about. We did a podcast on Saturday, so we have talked a little bit about the recent games, and there's only been one game since then, which was the game against the Pelicans, which turned out to be kind of a dogfight. And I'll say this, I was wrong about CJ McCollum hitting his over for the point total in that game because I would have bet the house on that. But Trey Murphy made up for it with a 30-point performance, despite being like a -4, which was interesting. And McCollum was a +11 despite the loss for the Pelicans. So what did you guys see in this one? What did you guys feel like was the biggest contributing factor for this being such a close game? And how'd you see it playing out on the whole?
I felt that after the Kings game that they're going to come back, and then especially Tatum after, all the stuff with Brandon Jennings, that, they're going to come out with a fire, with a purpose, and they're just going to kind of put them away. One thing people do have to, take into consideration here, granted, New Orleans is not a good team. They're a really bad team, but this is not the same Pelicans team that's been playing all season. They actually had a mostly healthy team. They had Zion playing. They had, DeJounte Murray, who becomes, Michael Jordan whenever he plays the Celtics. So this team that was playing is much better than an 8-win team. So it's for context. Not that this game should have been competitive as is, but this is not a complete, dog crap team that took the floor the other night. Having said that, it felt like, when the shots weren't falling early and New Orleans hung around, they're just kind of going through the motions. And that's another thing that's really been frustrating lately about the Celtics is that it just feels like they just kind of, they're sleepwalking. They're just going through the motions, just trying to get through the calendar and the schedule to get to the postseason. And that's what it felt like, just figuring they have enough talent and the shots will eventually fall and that they'll win the game. And not only did was it a dogfight, but then at the end, they almost were intentionally trying to give the game away with some of the mistakes down the stretch, with the turnovers, with 5 seconds. And not to say that the officiating was great down the stretch, but it should have never even been to that position to get into the officials' hands. So it's a win. And, at this point in the season, you'll take any win you can get kind of in the dog days of the season. But, it left a lot to be desired. And, we'll touch more on that later. But, yeah, I mean, you're happy to have the victory, but, you didn't feel great doing it.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So first of all, I asked Jason after the game about smoking those 2 free throws. And he seemed like he was pretty pissed. I asked, so I suspect he was pretty pissed he missed those free throws. Yeah, Alex, I mean, I think to your point, they just they've been making unforced errors, but really the story is the Pelicans hit the most threes they've hit all season and the most threes they've hit in a while. And the Celtics continue to not hit threes. And so you can imagine a world where Boston hits 3 more threes and they're still not shooting great. And the Pelicans, water finds its level. They don't shoot like 45, 46% from 3. And then suddenly it's like a 10-point game the way it was supposed to be. So it's really reductive to bring it back to 3-pointers, but Boston is like 23rd and 3-point percent since December 1st, but they're still taking the most threes. So like same thing was true against the Kings the night before. Same thing was true against the Thunder. Same thing was true against the Pacers. The opposing team hit 3 threes in a row, 4 threes in a row at like the worst possible time for the Celtics. And then suddenly it was a game. If a few shots don't break that way, everything's a little different. So I'm not making excuses for the Celtics and they wouldn't want me to, but it is one of those things where like, if you squint, you can see how quickly the game goes another direction. Speaking of which, Ryan, I mean, CJ McCollum almost, I don't know what the over-under was, but he completely biffed that layup at the end. I mean, he had that. So, I mean, Horford played good defense, but there were errors on both sides, I guess.
And so going back to you mentioned the 3-point percentage since the beginning of December for the Celtics. And since that time, they're 12-8 in 20 games exactly, which is, like you said, it's sort of reductive, but it does kind of tell the story as far as like, if they just start hitting shots, they're going to be winning more of these games. It's just a simple fact. They'll run away with a couple more games that have been close, and they'll be in some games much more closely than some of the ones that they've gotten sort of run off the floor. Like that Kings game, for example, they would have been obviously much more competitive. And so some other things that were interesting in this Pelicans game, Porzingis he had 19 points, 11 rebounds, 1 assist, but was a -8. So do you guys feel like there's any concern with Porzingis as far as his on-off numbers and what the splits are looking like as far as when he's on the court versus not on the court? Are there defensive issues? What's causing that, do you think?
I think they're making a concerted effort to try to get him involved, especially early on in games. And I feel like a lot of it is maybe they're kind of getting out of the way that they would normally play, especially because the beginning of the season, they were just kind of like almost like an extension of last season where they were just running through everybody. And then Porzingis comes back much sooner than we all anticipated. And at that point, you're like, well, it's really over for the league now. And it just feels like they kind of gotten out of the rhythm of what they're doing. Plus, every other night, seemingly up until the last like week or so, 2 weeks, they've had just different lineups every night, just due to injuries, people being in and out of the lineup. So a lot of that is an adjustment, but there's been talk about bringing him off the bench and the merits of like what that may do, but I don't think that's the answer either. I mean, because ultimately you're going to want him in the starting lineup and of course, closing games as well. It's just kind of finding the right things, but again, it's shots falling. I mean, that really tells the story of everything. It's just an aberration. Like, I think the last 3 or 4 games we've been outshot. Like, we've given up more 3-pointers than we've made, and that just doesn't happen. So that, like, again, it's water finding its level. It's, if you're going to have this funk, it's better to have it, December, beginning mid-January than having it happen, April, May, and June. So I think ultimately everything will work itself out. My big thing for Porzingis is as long as he's healthy. Every single time he like makes lateral movements or comes down, you just, you hold your breath. Like, well, I posted about this. I've never been so happy to see a replay of someone getting kicked in the nuts than I did in that Denver game. Like, I thought he like shattered his Achilles the way he was reacting after that. For the first like 30 seconds, I'm like, well, there goes Porzingis again. And then you see the replay and you're like, oh, okay, it's just like a Draymond Green thing, except unintentional. So it wasn't, he was like fine. But I think everything will work itself out. This isn't like this is a new team. Like, they played with him, they played without him, like pretty much almost 50-50 since he's been here. So I don't have any doubt they'll be able to figure it out. Again, it's just kind of hitting shots and water finding its level with shooting differentials for them and their opponents.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, Kristaps came out that he kind of forced his way back in the finals. I get the sense that he didn't rush back. I mean, he's healthy. I don't think he's doing anything unsafe, but I think he tried to get back as quick as possible. And a lot of things that happen when you have a leg injury is you lose conditioning, and so you have to build that back. And he said, look, I'm only 80-85%. So they're dealing with 80-85% of Porzingis. Yeah, part of why they're not hitting as many threes or taking as many threes is Kata and Luke don't take threes. I mean, Nimi and Luke are basically the same player. They defend at the rim, and you can put them in pick and roll, and they can do a little bit of passing, but that's basically how they offer. what Porzingis offers is just like radically different. So yeah, this was only like the 5th time they had their top 6, something like that. And Missoula said after the Kings game, like they're building habits and trust. They're still getting into the rhythm again. So in some ways, we don't know much about this team. I mean, last year they had insane injury luck. Obviously not in the postseason as much, but they were the same group from this jump, and we got to see them build that, and it was really consistent. This time around, it's really up and down. Hauser's in and out of the lineup. Jalen misses some time. Obviously, Kristaps has been out for a while. And I take the point that Al Horford has been phenomenal in the starting lineup, but do not put more minutes under Horford's belt. There's no reason to do that. Like, cosmetically winning more games in January is not worth having a tired Al Horford in the postseason. We saw that in 2023. He was tired. He was flat. And we saw that in 24 when he was rested. He was absolutely phenomenal. So they're like 3 games off their over-under for win totals for the season. I mean, that's another thing Joe said after the game on Saturday. He said, you think I'm talking to a morgue right now? We're 28-11. Like, these are good problems to have. So I get that it's our job to talk about these things and to take them seriously, but I don't think the Celtics are taking them as seriously as the people who get paid to talk about it on the internet, which is us.
Well, speak for yourself as far as getting paid goes, but so a couple other things I wrote down from that game. Peyton Pritchard was a +12 and Luke was a +13. It just would signal to me that the Pelicans bench is like just really bad. They don't have the horses to compete with the Celtics, and those are Pritchard and Cornette specifically are guys who probably would be like really much more in the rotation for New Orleans than they are here. And that's not to say they're not in the rotation here, but they would be probably close to starting caliber players for them. And I like to pay. I have an affinity for players who aren't that good, but like I just enjoy watching. One of those is the rookie Yves Missi from the Pelicans, and he only had 4 rebounds in this game. So the Celtics somehow, some way managed to keep him off the boards, which, whether that helped them win the game or not, I'm not really sure, but he averages 8.2. So I just found that to be interesting. They were able to hold him way under his average. And as you said, the Celtics, they obviously don't stink. They still find themselves second in the East. The Knicks are close behind, and the Bucks are in 5th, but they're slowly kind of climbing out of that hole that they dug for themselves. And the Magic are sitting in 4th, and they're just now getting Paolo back. They're still missing Franz Wagner. So what do you guys think, not to lean into the negative stuff too much here, but overall, what do you guys think is leading to this kind of malaise that they've been playing with recently? And I guess, Alex, specifically, we talked about your question that you posed to me and Ollie for last week for Saturday, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this topic. What's your take? Why are they where they are right now?
I think it's human nature. I mean, you just went through a long, grueling season last year where you were dominant and you feel like you had something to prove the whole time. Granted, there were some people last year that no matter if they won 82-0, it didn't matter unless they're going to win the championship. So they can only prove so much. But, having, implementing 2 new players, Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, where they just dominated the league. They dominated the postseason. Then on top of that, you go late into June, then you have 3 players that play in the Olympics. Thanks to Steve Kerr, it was really only 2. But, you had this long, grueling season. Then you get right back into the new season. I feel like it was kind of momentum that carried them through like the first month or so, where you had the ring night, and then you just walk around kicking everyone's butts. And then it just kind of really settles in. It's like, okay, this is a new season, a long season. We still get, 5 months to go. And then I feel like they just they're conserving their energy a little bit. Like, the little Nixon bumps here and there. It's like, yeah, we'll take a night off, just rest up. Like, you're thinking long-term, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think at the other end, for us, we're playing the Kings in January, at the beginning of January. This doesn't really matter for us. We just got back from a long road trip where we actually did, short of the second half in Oklahoma City, they looked really good in those 4 games on the road versus Sacramento, where it's like, this is their championship, so to speak. Like, you're playing the defending champs in their house. Like, this is the game you have circled on the calendar. You also are under an interim head coach in Doug Christie. You have, you're fighting for, a lot of different things. So the game means a lot more to a lot of these other teams. And it's like the same thing with Philly when we saw them on Christmas. Like, yeah, that was still disappointing. But the Philly team we saw was a pretty much healthy team, which wasn't reflective of their record. So we're kind of getting everybody's best shot. And then on those same nights, it seems like there's like the shooting variations. Our shots aren't falling. People from their team, like freaking Caleb Martin's hitting 7 threes. Where you're getting like PTSD from the conference finals 2 years ago, watching him and that like awful shooting motion he has. But I just think they're bored, and I really think that. So up until recently, up until maybe like the last 2 losses, every loss was just kind of like whatever. Like last year and previous seasons, any regular season loss would really bother me. And then I was living in Miami, so I go into work and I'm hearing about it the next day. It didn't even matter if the Heat lost as well. The Celtics losing was the top story to them and everybody. So these losses, they don't matter, like, to me. Obviously, if these losses are putting you into like starting, the playoffs on the road. Not that for the Celtics that's really even a problem, because they're the best road playoff team there is. And I actually think they lock in more, even the regular season on the road. Even Tatum said, he's like, we have 41 home games at home, but like that you may only go out to, New Orleans or whatever once a year, and that kid got the, tickets for Christmas to see him. So they feel like they lock in and almost care more on the road. So I just think it's, like I said, the dog days of the season. It's, the cold months. There's still so much time to go. They know that ultimately all that they're going to be judged on what happens in the postseason. So it's kind of hard to get up as much for these games. I don't think, short of a collapse, they're going to finish any lower than third. And even looking at the Knicks' upcoming schedule, and even looking at how the Knicks have played against teams above 500, I just don't see the Knicks catching them. I just think ultimately the Celtics are just better than the Knicks, and they're going to play out the schedule that way. And other teams that are below them, Miami, I can't see making the leap. You reference Milwaukee, but they still are losing to some bad teams as well, and that's an older team too. So I think ultimately they're going to end up in the 2 seed. If they have to go into Cleveland in the playoffs, I think we're the team to beat. They're the team that has something to prove. I feel like they're more of a regular season team. They're kind of like the Hawks of years past. They might be a little bit better because they have a better star in Donovan Mitchell, but I'll still take the Celtics over anybody in a playoff series, which is all that ultimately matters.
Yeah, but I'll try to get granular. But again, I don't think that there's too much to worry about. I mean, last season the Celtics had, was it like around Thanksgiving they lost to the Bucks so bad they didn't even play the starters in the second half, or in March I think it was, they had back-to-back losses to the Hawks that were pretty ugly. There are just times where this team, like other teams, looks really disjointed. And I think, there are 1 or 2 losses, like if you turn some of the losses this season into wins, just the stink isn't there, but because the wins stacked. I mean, the big thing is at one point they lost 4 games in 7. So at one point in the regular season, theoretically, they were playing poorly enough to lose a series, if you want to draw those conclusions. So I guess there's some concern there. And I don't know. Drew Holiday has not been as good. I think that doesn't mean that he's like a different version of himself, but he hasn't been as good. I think Jalen hasn't been as good. I think he's gambling on defense in a weird way. I think he is a little less consistent than he was last season, but he's still going to make the All-Star team, and deservedly so, right? So there's some nitpicky things, I think, with the top 6, who, again, have only played together 5 or 6 times. And then, look, the Celtics played 3 games against the Bucks, and they played Nimi Keita like 15 minutes in those games. Like, Jordan Walsh is getting real burn. I mean, part of it is by necessity because of injuries, but part of it is also they're tinkering. They're seeing what they've got. They're getting guys engaged. They're getting guys to buy in. So I don't think, I would push back on, they don't care because they're psychotically competitive people, but I think that they are flexible with their approach in that, go let Jordan Walsh get 10 minutes of burn. I mean, we were watching Drew Peterson get real first half minutes in games that sort of matter. No offense to Drew Peterson, but that's different than what we saw last year. So yeah, if I wanted to be a homer and a doomer at the same time, I'd say Jaylen Brown needs to be better, and so does Drew. But the lineups are changing. The rotation has been changing. Joe keeps changing sub patterns. I think he's been letting Jason play the entire first, the entire third, and sitting the start to the second and the fourth. I think that's been a bad choice. I think that's been problematic. But on the main, if they start hitting their threes, I'm not particularly concerned. This stretch of 16 games between now and the All-Star break is pretty insidious. And, maybe if they have their foot off the gas a little bit, they don't go 14-2, they go 10-6, and that looks different than last year, but I wouldn't sweat it yet.
And you mentioned some of the tinkering with the lineup. I feel like you saw a little bit of that last year with the game in Atlanta, where they had they had Porzingis guarding DeJounte Murray like one-on-one. And I was actually at that game, which was really it was a great game to be at. It wasn't the result, but it was a fantastic game. And after that game, I remember Joe talking about, they're in a position where they're able to sort of take some liberties to tinker with the lineup now because they have that freedom because they are good enough for that. And so the other thing is, with you mentioning Jalen, I know he obviously has not been scoring anywhere near as much as people would like him to. The one thing I would say is it does seem he's sort of been doing whatever else is asked of him in a way that in the way that he does sometimes. Because in that Pelicans game specifically, he only had 16 points. He only took 2 threes, and he still had 8 rebounds and 7 assists. So he's finding other ways to contribute, sort of along the lines of the way that Tatum does when he has those kind of off nights as far as scoring goes, which I do like to see. Obviously, you'd like to see him get back to the 25, 30 point scoring nights. And that would certainly help them, probably push over the top and beat some of these teams that they really should be beating even worse than they are or aren't right now. The only other thing, sort of to wrap up on the negative stuff that I keep talking about, is Derek White. So his last 3 games, he had 6 points, 3 points. He missed the Nuggets game, so that one's out of there. But 11 points in the loss to OKC on just 2 of 11 shooting from 3. I feel like his 3-point shot has looked really bad recently. And Cameron, you might be in better touch with the team to know a little bit more about this than maybe Alex or I would. What do you think is going on with Derek White? Do you think he could use a rest, or is there anything else they can do to kind of get him back on track?
I mean, if he was sick enough to miss that Denver game, I mean, he's from Colorado. That's a homecoming. He must have been really sick. So I'll give him the whole week. I mean, if against the Kings and the Pelicans, he's still under the weather, so be it. I guess probably the answer to your question that I'm going to give is an unpopular one, that probably Derek White offensively isn't as good as people think he is. He has nights where he can go 8 for 10 from 3, and you go, wow, he's the real deal. He's a splash brother. But that probably is overachieving on his front. Look, he's one of the best defensive guards, full stop. That's not fabricated. That's not being overzealous or anything like that. What he can do with his body on defense is really, really unique, especially blocking other guards in transition. But offensively, he's supposed to be a supportive piece, and that he has become this kind of sometimes 20 points per game scorer probably is either him overachieving or we're in kind of the stage of growing pains where he's learning to be that dude every night, right? So maybe I'll be wrong about this, and by March and April, has found his groove, and he'll be back to scoring 18, 20 points a game pretty consistently. Or he'll be closer to 14, 15 points a game, which is totally great for a team that's loaded. And we'll look at some of the games from the beginning of the season, some of the games from the spring last year, and say, wow, that was really special stuff. To say nothing of the fact that he is not, again, truly a fringe all-star, truly a champion, truly all defensive. I love Derek, but I suspect it's Jason and Jalen should be doing the bulk of the scoring, and they're really lucky that they don't have to all the time. So it's another thing I wouldn't over-index on, but certainly be better if he was scoring 20 points a game more consistently.
Feels like he's very streaky too. There'll be some nights, going back into earlier in the season and last season, where it's just he just can't miss. It's just every tough 3, not to mention his defensive prowess and what he does, as far as protecting the rim, shot blocking. But I feel like his streak's kind of going the other way, and it could be, he's under the weather still. It's the drain of a long season last year that went into June, and then he actually played real minutes in the Olympics. So I think a lot of that as well. We were seeing, he's kind of like an Iron Man. He would never miss games, and he's missed games this season. So it's even if you watch, I just think back to, and not comparing us, the Bulls of the 90s, but even watching that series, yeah, they won all these titles, but if you look at the actual, during the season of them, they had their ups and downs, things like that. I think in the 98 season, they started off 9-8, and they were losing all these games, and it just, everyone's oh, is this it for them? Granted, they had more legs to stand on than we do, but it's just that's just how it goes. This isn't, you're not going to go 70-12 like every single year. Like, it is what it is. They're still on pace to win, high 50s or possibly hit 60 wins. And that would be, under expectations for some people. Like, they're not, whether they win 63 games or 58 games, like, it doesn't really matter to be at the end of the season, like, build the right habits and, have everybody at full health going into the postseason, knock on wood. So that's where we're at. And I fully trust Derek, come postseason. He's a big time player, big time shot maker, especially against like Miami. So I'm not really that concerned about him. Now, if this keeps up for, another month or two, then you start to have more worries, but I don't really see any reason to have like long-term concern with him.
Yeah, I'm with you. So enough of all that. Let's get into the Raptors game for tonight. So the Raptors, they're sitting at only 9 wins for the year. But here's a fun one that I've mentioned before when they've played the Raptors. They're 22-16-2 against the spread. So they're far more competitive than their win-loss record would suggest. And that's with them actually being 3-7 against the spread in their last 10 games. And not that, that's the be all end all as far as what that metric can tell you. It could be completely coincidental, but over a large sample size of games, it would seem to suggest to me, like I said, they're a much more competitive team than people think. But the Celtics, of course, had that hilarious game on New Year's Eve where the Raptors scored only 71 points. And, the whole thing was that if the Celtics had gone completely scoreless in the first half, they still would have won the game. So they seem to have quite a pendulum swing as far as what they are. So what are you guys looking for tonight from the guys? Do you think this is kind of a get right opportunity for the team? And what else are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that. I mean, if you look at the 2 Raptors games this season, one of them literally went to overtime and took a Jason Tatum, long buzzer beating 3 to win. The other one, as you referenced, they could have gone scoreless in the first half and still won, and they won by over 50. So I think it's a game where you need to just put your foot in their throats from the beginning, because that's a team where you let young player, you come out with half-ass energy. It's like, oh, it's Toronto. It's like they suck. We just beat them by almost 60 last game. Like, they can just go through the motions, and you let like a young team like that hang around. Then you start having, guys that you wouldn't expect just start, hitting threes, and like the longer you let them hang around, dude, that's how, stuff happens. So just, put them away early, take it serious. And then, then you can get some rest later in the day, because like you mentioned, they have a lot of games coming up in a short duration of time. So do that. Say if you don't want to play the fourth quarter, put them away, like bury them in the first half, be up to 20 plus at halftime, give yourself a position to be able to rest at the end, and not even let it the chance to have, rookies or, unknown players, have big games against you, which seems to happen. The more you fool around, the more you find out with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing is Jakob Poeltl is dominated the glass when they went to overtime that one game, and like Domantas Sabonis had 28 rebounds the other day against the Celtics. Like that was
I was just gonna bring him up too. Same thing.
Like maybe fluky, but there is a certain type of big who is like a little quicker and like a little more flexible in his game that can really dominate the glass. So the Celtics should try to avoid that. I think Scotty Barnes is low-key having a great season. He was hurt for a while, but he's fabulous. I think RJ Barrett is having a good season too. And they don't really have a point guard. Like their offense is just kind of a mess. So yeah, it's one of those things, Alex, where like they could play with their food a little bit, and then some guys on the other team get hot, and like suddenly, it's a 10-point game becomes, actually the Celtics are down and they've got to play catch up. And that's been when they've been bad, is that they haven't stormed back in the fourth quarter, retaken the lead, and asserted themselves as the champs. If other teams go up late in the game, the Celtics have kind of floundered a little bit. So I sort of hope they just play their game. They don't try to overcorrect. They don't try to make a statement. They don't try to prove anything to themselves. I hope that they, pull out a win, but there's no reason to think that Celtics basketball, when played the way it's supposed to be played right now, is under threat of losing to Raptors basketball with respect to Toronto. How's that for getting people excited for tonight's game?
I know, right? Yeah, tune in for that. But I guess on the other side of that, I wouldn't mind if the Celtics had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as far as wanting to kind of prove people wrong, and just sort of get out of the we call it a funk. Like Joe said, they're still whatever the record is, they've lost 11 games. It's not a catastrophe, but I would not mind seeing them sort of wanting to go out there, prove people wrong, maybe have a little bit of an extra edge. I feel like that would be good to see, just to know that they're still locked in, even though it is January. Like, obviously they can turn it on when they want to, but I wouldn't mind seeing that. That's just me personally.
Yeah, I mean, they beat the pants off of them on New Year's. They had an okay to pretty good game, I guess, against the Timberwolves, and then they really pooped the bed against the Thunder. So I don't know how much a big win against the Raptors can take you. But they do have, I don't think they take it like this, but they have a sort of tough back-to-back this weekend against the Magic and the Hawks. I don't think that they're like preserving themselves in advance for that, but they have a bunch of tough games this upcoming weekend too.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing. Just take care of business early on so that you can get your rest at the end of the games. And then those are games that, like, maybe before the season you'd look at. I mean, obviously Orlando is ascending, but you'd be like, okay, it's a back-to-back, but it's at home and you're playing, inferior opponents. And now you saw what happened when they didn't take Atlanta seriously earlier this year. And then in Orlando, when they were very shorthanded, same situation. So I suspect they'll be ready for that. Granted, you're going to have only Porzingis in one of those and Horford in the other. But yeah, tonight just take care of business. Don't play with your food as Cameron referenced, and just get out of there and healthy and rested with a W and get ready for the back-to-back.
And looking forward a little bit to that Hawks game on Saturday, I think it is. There's a lot of teams that don't take the Hawks as seriously as they should. And I mentioned this on the podcast with Ollie on Saturday. That team is a lot better than people would give them credit for. They've got Jalen Johnson is emerging as like a star player. He's been missing a couple games here and there, but he's great. Trae Young is having like an all-time season distributing the basketball. He's finally got some guys around him that'll knock down shots. And as a resident of Atlanta, like, I just feel like I pay a little bit closer attention to them and probably give them a little bit more credit than they deserve. So the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but that you can't fall asleep against them. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah. Well, when guys are super locked in, sometimes the Celtics struggle, and Trae is always locked in. So he's undersized. I mean, he's just such a liability on defense, unfortunately. But if he has it going on offense, that's a big deal. And yeah, the Hawks uniquely kind of, I think, give the Celtics problems because they have so much length on the perimeter, which, with respect to the Cavaliers, their fatal flaw is the thing the Celtics do best. So, like, unfortunately for Cleveland, however good they are this season, if they meet the Celtics in the postseason, the Celtics have like absolute Cavalier kryptonite on their perimeter and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. The Hawks aren't the quality of team as either Boston or Cleveland is, but the size and the switchability and the length they have on the perimeter is enough to kind of muck it up for what makes the Celtics so good. So yeah, I actually quite like watching the Hawks basketball. I think Trae's fun. I think Quinn Snyder's fun. I admire that guys like Capella have stuck around for as long as they have. Mm-hmm. The Magic are also kind of big and lengthy and unforgiving, so Boston could be pretty tired when that Hawks game rolls around on Saturday.
Yeah, those are teams, particularly Orlando, that for years has given us trouble, mostly because of not just their size, their length, their physicality, the effort that they play with. That's something that, like, a team like the Celtics that, that wants to shoot threes and like not have the physicality, especially in a regular season game, can be disrupting. I don't think the Hawks are going to catch them off guard this time just because of what happened the previous game, that they're going to be more ready for it. But, like I said, that Hawk team is better than we definitely thought. We thought they were tanking this year, after, they traded DeJounte Murray in the offseason, but they feel like they got almost the better end of that deal with Dyson. But, yeah, I mean, I'd like to win all three of these games. These are definitely three winnable games, but all three of them are games they could lose. I mean, tonight, I guess you never say never, in this league, especially in the regular season. But like tonight's a game we should take care of. But like those two games at home, I almost worry about us more at home just because they get more comfortable, they get more lax. So yeah, just lock in as much as you can for January games against inferior opponents. But I think Paulo Banchero is gonna be back for the Orlando game. He is back, so that's having him in the building, especially for Tatum, it's one of his guys in the league, another Dookie, should hopefully lock them in for it.
Mm-hmm.
And one last thing on the Hawks, I'm wrong about a lot of things, but I've never been more wrong about than I have about Trae Young. Like, I didn't think he would survive at this level with his size and his, as you mentioned, the liability on the defensive end. Just watching him at Oklahoma, obviously he's a great scorer, he's a great shooter, he's a good passer, good ball handler, all that stuff. But I just was dead wrong about him. So, I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. So going around the league, looking at some of the other stuff that's going on, we should, I feel like, touch on the Jimmy Butler situation. Alex used to live in Miami, so you're probably more tapped in with some of the Miami fans and how they're feeling about all this. What's your sense on what's going on with the Butler situation, and what do you think will ultimately happen?
So my initial reaction to all this was kind of the same as their fan base, where it's like Pat Riley and his ego almost reminded me of Belichick throughout this ways. It's kind of like, you're going to win, but you're going to win his way. And if it's not his way, then, see you later. Like kind of the system is bigger than any individual. But the way Jimmy Butler, if you look at his track record as well, it seemingly like he's like an employee that's made a mess on his way out of everywhere and forced his way out of everywhere. And at some point he becomes a common denominator. So it's like two strong-headed bulls going at each other where neither, wants to blink first, and they're going to make it really ugly. But it's just, Jimmy Butler, you also is kind of a hypocrite. You can't say like, anywhere but here, and then just be like, no, only Phoenix, when that's a team that's like, it's almost impossible. I mean, it's physically possible, but it's like really uncomfortable for them to trade him. Like, Miami doesn't have to do anything, because at the same time, like, yeah, you don't want to not have Jimmy Butler. You'd rather have, somebody else playing or having options that other people play. But then if you lock into people that have long-term contracts, like, then you're kind of stuck. Granted, free agency is not what it used to be. A lot of players don't make it to free agency now, but you have less options if you get stuck with, players that have longer term deals at higher salaries. So I don't know what happens, because I think he's eligible to come back on Friday. And there's some things where it's like he's not going to play another game for them. He's going to keep making this messy. And then the Heat, can change the wording on the suspension to basically like not fulfilling his job duties. So I really don't know how this plays out. I'd like to say, if it, gun to my head, like, I think he ultimately gets traded, and it's going to happen like the day before. Like, they're going to probably wait out. I think ultimately he'll cave a little bit. He'll open up his like list, almost like Damian Lillard, where it's like Miami or nothing. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this, maybe that. It's just, does Jimmy Butler want to play this year? Does Jimmy Butler want to, improve his market value for the postseason, for the offseason, and get to play in the postseason? It comes down to that. Because otherwise, Riley really could just ship him anywhere and like call his bluff, like, okay, go to Washington. Do you want to just not play the rest of the season? Then you just won't get paid. Washington or other teams that want to clear out salary on their books, it might be expiring deals, stuff like that. So the fan base, I think, as this has played out the last like couple weeks, they've gone from like bashing Pat Riley to just kind of over Jimmy Butler. They're kind of like, all right, like, he's not, if you don't want to be here anymore, then kind of like, see you later. Like, that's what it's felt like. They were just Jimmy Butler defenders up until recently, but even, with Austin, who's like one of their big fans, he just kind of seems over it. And that's what a lot of the fan base sees. So for a resolution, I feel like everyone would just like to have him move on. From, as a Celtics fan, you don't want to see him go to like a team. He's not going to go to the Knicks. And then, Milwaukee kind of made sense, but, that could be a team that like you put Jimmy Butler in there instead of Middleton, and motivated Jimmy Butler if he's healthy. That team could, become a lot more formidable. But other than that, I mean, if he goes out west, I don't think it really affects us unless he goes to a team that's the team you ultimately end up seeing in the finals.
Yeah, it's hard. I think whatever happened with Jimmy's dad last season, he gets, the whole year is a write-off for Jimmy. And I don't know. I've never had that experience. Like, I could see having a professional fallout with my employer if I felt like they didn't have my back in that like stretch of my life. And it doesn't seem like the Heat had Jimmy's back in that regard. But he's also like a cantankerous guy. I mean, Alex, yeah, to your point, it's kind of like the two worst personalities to get in this kind of beef got in this kind of beef. I think it reflects really poorly on Bam Adebayo that he has played as crappy as he has this season. He's a great player, but maybe not as good as we thought. I think they got to trade Terry Rozier yesterday because that has not worked out well. It's hard to find a Jimmy team that just like mathematically works with the new CBA. I could talk myself into a few teams doing basically like pre-agency, like the Pistons could get in on it, and then they get 2 years of Jimmy, but he's got that $52 million player option. So it's like, that's hanging over everyone's head, right? Like that's such financial prison if you think poorly of Jimmy Butler. I mean, you can say, oh, he got 5 points that game, 6 points this game. He must really be mailing it in, or he's in a different stage of his career. And like, that's a $52 million gamble next year.
And that's actually, it just reminded me of something. I'm like, yeah, he can say like, I'm only going to this team, trade me to Phoenix. He doesn't have a no trade clause, and he has $52 million, which he's not going to pretty much get on the open market at this point. Like that, he's almost like, I mean, for different reasons, almost like, Kyrie a couple of years ago, where it's like, do you really want to touch this? Do you really want to get involved with this because of how he is? Like, we're going to call his bluff. So what is he going to, you're going to trade him somewhere? Like maybe a team like Washington doesn't want him because like, what's the point? But like, you get him to a team like Detroit that maybe it's on the border of the playoffs, that like, it's a veteran. Maybe you just want someone just to get into the playoffs, like get the younger players some experience. You trade in there, you're going to call his bluff. What are you going to sit the rest of the year? What are you going to opt in next year and then sit? Like, we can, suspend you. Like, he's going to ruin the end of his career, the last of his, like, tail end of his prime. So ultimately, he doesn't have the power that he thinks he does unless he's willing to sacrifice his reputation, like the end of his like real good basketball and money, which I don't think ultimately he will do. I think it'll be like Dame in the end, where it'll open up a few more teams. I think ultimately February 6th or right around that, like when things come to a head, like I think ultimately he will get dealt.
I mean, I guess if Hero and Bam end up siding with Jimmy, then then Jimmy has great power. Because whatever happens next, those are the guys that Miami's going to have to lean on immediately. And I don't know if this is the case. I mean, other than Kevin Love seems to be in Jimmy's corner, but if
Hero
Jimmy is the
and Bam
locker
haven't
room,
been vocal, and that's like what a lot of Heat fans have been saying. Like a lot of Heat fans have questioned Bam's leadership with a lot of stuff because like he just seems like someone almost like Tatum that just wants to hoop. He doesn't want to get involved in like altercations on the court. He doesn't want to get involved in like political stuff around the organization. And then Hero right now is kind of getting his shine he's been like the best player in the Heat this season. He's having a career year, so I don't think he wants to get involved, and he hasn't really been involved in any of it. So to what you referenced, yeah, if it went in that direction, sure, that changes things a little bit, but that hasn't been the case so far. So we'll see what happens when he comes out of his suspension, if he stays suspended or whatever. But the trade deadline's coming up real soon, so we'll have some finality to this in the next month.
Yeah, and that's all good stuff. So appreciate both of you going into detail on that, so I don't have to. And so a couple last things. Cameron, number one, I saw you give the old eyeballs emoji to a tweet earlier today from Bruce of the Celtics Digest on YouTube. He was speculating about a potential trade for Walker Kessler for the Celtics. Number one, do you think that's in play? And how would they get it done? And number two, do you think it would be worthwhile / obviously it's probably not necessary, but do you think it's something that they would entertain?
So I wrote about this a few weeks ago. I happen to think it's a good idea. It's almost definitely not going to happen. Walker Kessler he's third in the league in blocks. I mean, he's just like one of the league's studs. If he didn't play in Utah, you'd hear a lot more about him. And such that Utah probably, if they wanted to trade him, could get just about any package of picks and young players that they really wanted. Like Walker Kessler is absolutely phenomenal. So if you're the Celtics, you absolutely want to make that deal for a couple of reasons. First of all, Luke and Keita are great, but they only do like three things, and they only do them okay. I mean, Keita can't play defense in the playoffs. Like, let's just keep it real. I know that fans really like him. He can't play defense in the playoffs. We don't know if Cornette can either. I mean, it's been 50-50. They can rim run. They can set screens. They're fine on defense, but they're not great. Walker Kessler is a bona fide all defensive player, and that would just be like an embarrassment of riches to have him to be the center off the bench. Or if Porzingis or Horford are hurt, I mean, you'd have a real playoff starter quality player. And I know a lot of Celtics fans haven't seen Kessler play. He really is the real deal on defense. This dude is like an absolute stud. He's also on a $2 million rookie deal that for the next 2 years stays. It's like $4 million and $4.5 million. This Celtics team is going to get expensive in a hurry if they're going to bring Horford back. I actually don't really think they financially can bring Horford back unless they make some crazy moves. So figuring out how to turn any unused salary into an asset, not just this season, but again, going back to quote unquote pre-agency, going into next season would be phenomenal. So Springer makes $4 million. He's a nice kid, but like he doesn't play. He can't play in the playoffs. If you could turn that into Walker Kessler, that is a magic trick. And I see a lot of people either talking about the Walker Kessler trade or just straight up saying, oh, but what about the first round picks? What are you talking about? The Celtics are a championship team. Rookies don't swing titles. What, you want them to draft a 19-year-old so that 6 years from now, maybe he plays? Jordan Walsh is not make or break for the Celtics team. So trading away the 28th pick this season and the 25th pick 3 seasons from now for a chance to win a second title, that math doesn't math. So people who are getting sanctimonious about holding on to their picks, they're not players who are going to play. They're not players they're going to be able to pay. And I know, like, it's so frustrating. You can write 3,000 words on Jason Tatum's fixed jump shot, and then you can write 300 words on why they should trade for like a 20, 30 second round pick, and people will read the second round pick trade buzz because people love daydreaming about the future. So I get why people are so sanctimonious about these picks, but you're fans of a title team. Act like it. Trade the picks. Go get winnable players. And Walker Kessler is one of the, first of all, for complicated math reasons, the Celtics can't stack salaries in trades. They can't bring in extra money. It has to be a 1-for-1 and it has to be the exact dollar amount or less. So there's really not that many trades out there. Javonte Green, Daniel Tice, like there's not that many players legally the Celtics can trade for. Getting a guy who's cost controlled, who's a stud, who peeks around the corner at like a post Al Horford world, or if like this new owner comes in and they're cheap and suddenly Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis aren't on the team anymore. Brad Stevens isn't just worried about June. He's worried about next June and the June after that. And if not Walker Kessler, getting smart about that would be a good thing because, and I'll stop ranting here. Look at Milwaukee, look at Phoenix, look at these teams that are just financially painted into a corner. They've got no other moves to make because the CBA is just, first of all, it's so confusing and it's not fun to have to deal with as someone who writes about basketball. But in terms of team building, it just like puts you in a box. And the Celtics have a few more tricks to play. I think that would be a worthy one rather than sitting on picks that are going to be players they don't play.
So I'd say a few points to that. We have old friend Danny Ainge over there.
Yeah, that too.
So maybe he does us a solid like Kevin McHale did him one years ago. Not saying Walker Kessler is KG, but I'll say a few things though, pros and cons of it. Pros, obviously, I mean, he's a stud. He doesn't make a lot of money. He's ascending. He's cost controlled, which for a team that gets very expensive. So of course, if you can get him, and maybe Danny has a slightly less price for you than he'd have for, an interested Miami or Lakers or, a team like that he has more of a personal vendetta with, that he doesn't want to do business with. So that could come to our advantage. The thing with the picks is not so much of the player that we'd actually get with those picks, but it's like those are kind of our last remaining real assets that we have moving forward. So not saying Walker Kessler isn't worth them. He great defensive players, shot blocker, as you mentioned. The only thing he doesn't do, though, that our team is built around is spacing the floor and being able to go 5 out, where that's not really Walker Kessler's game. So it kind of reminds you, I mean, obviously not saying Cornette or Nemi are at his level, but like the way they play when he's out there would be a similar style of offense. So like he doesn't replace like Horford and Porzingis, they have similar games, at least offensively. I mean, granted, Porzingis has much more capabilities, but, they get floor spacers. They can catch lobs, things like that, the way that they play. You can go 5 out, where it's like with Cornette, Nemi, and with Kessler in this example, you wouldn't be able to do that. But, I mean, in the playoffs, and especially going down the regular season, where you're not playing back-to-back for either Porzingis or for Horford, having somebody like Kessler in there where, like, you can play him every single game. Yeah, maybe he comes off the bench almost like a Bill Walton, like a 6-man. When you have a fully stacked team, but you can start him in a lot of these games. You're not going to have one or the other, and then there's going to constantly be maintenance down the stretch of things. So anything you can do to go try to win another championship right now, they're not as financially bleak, or in the future isn't as bleak as Milwaukee and Phoenix. And the problem for those teams is they don't have the picks, and they have an older team or more banged up team right now with less of a runway and less of a means, and they're not coming off a championship like we are. So I feel like we're in a much better position than those teams are. Especially for Phoenix, where they feel like the furthest off of the 3 teams, and they have the least amount of assets to get things done. And like the only reason that way they're going to get any better is like Jimmy Butler kind of strong arming him to make it happen, but he doesn't have that no trade clause, and Bradley Beal on their end does have it. So they're kind of in like the worst position of everybody. But to circle around to this, like if they can get it done for 2 first-round picks and Jaden Springer, like you do that all day. Like that's not even a consideration. Side note, me and Jaden Springer had the same barber down in Miami, and I heard for years how good this guy was. And I got a text as soon as we got him, like, you guys are getting a stud. And I'm sure he's great, as a player. Like any NBA player is a great player, but like for this league, I don't think Boston's where he's going to flourish. So maybe in Utah, where he'll get more chance to play minutes and develop as a player, which, you know, be good for him, almost like a Neesmith going to Indiana. You know, maybe he does turn into something, you know, good for him. But yeah, I mean, if you can get it done, you definitely, you know, phone Danny Ainge, you know, and him and Brett have a relationship and maybe, you know, make it happen. I don't think it does happen, but definitely be in on it for sure.
No, this whole thing started a few weeks ago when I said it's not going to happen, but it would be fun.
But what he really meant is that it is going to happen. So
sure. I mean, if it happens, I'll come right back on and we can talk all about it. How's that? But I'll come on anyways. But I don't think it's going to be because of that.
I'm sold. I say we do it. So I'm also glad you brought up Javonte Green. This is the last question I have for you guys. I feel like the two hyped up moves that people have been talking about are that are realistic, I think, are Javonte Green and a potential reunion with Lonnie Walker. So if you had to choose between the two, which would you take? Would you rather bring back Lonnie Walker or or have a reunion with Javonte Green?
Lonnie Walker.
Oh, I'd pick Green 100 times out of 100. The Celtics don't need more scoring; they need more defense.
For me, it's just because, you know, to be able to give. The reason I wanted Walker to begin with before the season was because, you know, Drew Holiday and Derek White playing those major minutes throughout the summer. Being able, when you can give those guys nights off and have a plug and play scorer, like a professional scorer like Lonnie Walker. So that's why I would choose him. I mean, I can see with the Green thing, especially with this like Tatum connection, you can make one more of those videos where he's talking about him being top 5 before the game. So you'd be there for the vibes for sure. I personally, big Lonnie Walker fan, even dating back to predating Ryan on this show. Like me and my former host, we were talking before last year's trade deadline about wanting Lonnie Walker. So I was really excited we got him. I'm really disappointed when, you know, he didn't make it out of camp. But now he's going to be cheaper on the tax bill signing him at this point. So, and, you know, he's balling overseas. So I'd love Lonnie Walker. The Daniel Tice thing, just to reference back to that, I mean, as long as you have Luke and Nimi Keita, I don't see how that happens if one of them ends up moving. And if I'm going to move one of them, honestly, I think Keita is probably the one because I like, you know, defense in the playoffs and just I feel like he's a little bit rawer. And maybe a team sees more potential in him than Cornette, so he may be able to bring back something a little bit more. But yeah, I don't see the Tice one, you know, again, unless one of those two are moved.
Yeah, I think I would take Green. Just you can guard the wing. That'll be really valuable. I don't really see Lonnie Walker's role in the postseason. I think, yeah, Alex is right. Like he can soak up minutes in the regular season, especially, you know, in like March and April. Just like let him roll out the ball and see what he can do. But in terms of like getting ready for the postseason, if Javonte Green still has it, and it's unclear. I mean, he plays for a really banged up Pelicans team, so we don't really know. I mean, we were talking about it before. They won like 50 something games last year. I mean, they were good. They're not the same version of that now, so we don't really know what Javonte Green is right now. I just between Isaiah, like I love Isaiah, I love Kemba. Kyrie Irving played for the Celtics. I didn't like watching the Celtics have a guy that you could pick on defense, and I quite like watching it when they're the team that's just like stones on defense. So that's why I'd pick Green.
I love it. I don't know if I could pick between the two, to be honest, because I was a big.
What you have to pick? You made us pick.
Well, so I'm getting to it. Don't worry. I loved Lonnie Walker in college specifically. I remember watching him and being like, this kid should be like a top 5 pick in the draft. He's insane. Wow, look at this player. He's so good. And obviously, wrong again by me. And Javonte Green, I thought was just such a fun player. Like the vibes in the locker room were so much fun when he was around the team. He had a great relationship with Tatum. They were good friends. And I also just love that. And again, this is just an aesthetic thing as a basketball fan. Like I loved watching him drive into the lane and just throw it down on people. Like he's got hops. So that's fun to watch. I do think I'd probably lean toward your side with Green too. And I know I'm going back on my Lonnie Walker love. But I feel like I'd rather have a guy who has been playing in the NBA this season. I feel like it would be hard for a guy to come from Europe and come back over and readjust immediately and get right into the rotation for a championship team. I feel like it would be easier for a guy to go from bad team to good team in the same league as opposed to switching leagues mid-season. I feel like that'd be really difficult to do.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. I like that.
Okay, so I mean, I feel like we probably covered it all. I don't think there's anything else we really need to get into. First of all, Cameron, thanks for jumping on with us again. It's been great to have you on. Hopefully we can have you back sometime. Alex and Ollie and I at some point will all be back on again. And I'm hoping we'll obviously have some more positive topics to touch on. The Celtics can go on a run and we can stop being so negative about everything. But as long as there's nothing else you guys want to hit on, I'll go ahead and just kind of wrap it up for everybody here. So for now, we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Ends tonight here. It's over. Time to say it again, Boston. Anything's possible. Banner number 18 has been secured. The Celtics are NBA champions.